Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Lieutenant Sarah Reeves sat still, her gloved hands resting on the edge of the polished steel surface. Around her, the room buzzed with conversation, short, sharp bursts of confidence bouncing off concrete walls. Men in desert fatigues laughed under their breath, passing glances at one another like a secret code she wasn't part of. The air smelled of dust, oil, and cigarette smoke. She'd been in rooms like this for 14 years. She knew this silence. It wasn't the kind born from respect or intimidation. It was the kind reserved for outsiders. The only woman in a task force of 43. The only sniper among them, with 9 confirmed deployments. And yet here she was again, unseen. Commander William Mitchell stood at the head of the table, pointer in hand, eyes cold and calculating. He was everything the special operations world revered: tall, square-jawed, the kind of man whose silence carried more authority than most people's words. The kind of man who didn't need to remind anyone that he'd earned his scars. Target compound, Sector 13, he began, pointing to a grainy satellite image projected on the wall. We believe 3 American aid workers were taken alive during the ambush. Intel places them here, near the eastern outskirts of Fallujah. Sarah's gaze sharpened. The faint shape on the screen, that blocky cluster of ruins, stirred something deep in her. She leaned forward slightly. Sector 13. 2 kilometers from where her brother had died. Her fingers brushed her neck unconsciously, feeling the raised lines of ink beneath her collar. Coordinates, black and permanent, a reminder she carried in silence. Extraction window is narrow, Mitchell continued. We move at 200 hours. Reeves, you'll provide overwatch from this ridge here. He circled a small elevation with his laser pointer. Maintain visual contact, call out hostiles, and support if needed. The assault team will move from the south. Sarah studied the map. The plan was solid, but not perfect. The ridge he'd chosen provided sightlines, yes, but limited angles for counterfire. The east side offered both high ground and a clear visual corridor through the alleys that insurgents often used to flank. She had learned that lesson the hardest way imaginable. "Sir," she said quietly, careful to keep her tone even, respectful. "If I may, I've operated in that sector before. There's a higher ridge to the east that gives better coverage over both the compound and the escape routes." Mitchell paused, his eyes flicked to her, measured, calculating. "We'll stick with the plan," he said finally, tapping the map once. "Recon from Colonel Collins's team confirmed these coordinates. You're dismissed." And that was that. Around her, chairs scraped, boots thudded against the floor. Operators began discussing gear, transport, timing. Sarah stayed seated for a beat longer than necessary, eyes fixed on the projection fatting from the wall. When she finally rose, she caught the murmur. "Trying to rewrite the playbook already. Gotta love the confidence. Did you see that tattoo? Coordinates, please. She's probably got the location of her favorite cafe on there." The laughter followed her to the door. Outside, the Iraqi sun was merciless, painting the base in waves of heat. Helicopters kicked up dust across the airfield, and somewhere beyond the walls, the city of Fallujah simmered, all crumbled mosques and shattered concrete. Sarah stopped beside the shade of a fuel truck, pulling her scarf higher around her neck. She wasn't hiding the tattoo, she was protecting it. The ink burned under the sun. It always did before a mission. 3 days earlier, she'd waited 72 hours under that same sun. 3 days in a ghillie suit, unmoving, dehydrated, invisible. She watched a high-value target step into her crosshairs and never step out again. When the bullet left her rifle, it took with it another piece of her silence. But she didn't think about that. She didn't think about the men she'd killed or the ones she couldn't save. She thought about the ones who'd never come back. She thought about Daniel. He'd been 2 years younger, smiled like the world still made sense. He was a medic too kind for the job, too human for the blood and the noise. 2 years ago in this same city, he'd been in a convoy that never made it to its destination. Sarah had been stationed a few clicks away. By the time she got there, it was over. All that remained were coordinates, the place she found him, the place she lost him. Those numbers lived on her neck now, carved into her like pennants. When she walked through base camp later that evening, the stares followed her again. Not cruel, just curious. Misplaced curiosity. The kind that turned warriors into whispers. She heard one of them, Dawson, laugh low to another SEAL near the recreation tent. "Try not to break a nail out there, tattoo girl," he said, smirking as she passed. Sarah didn't slow down, didn't look back. She learned long ago that silence was stronger than pride. That night under a sky stripped of stars, she cleaned her rifle in silence. The M4A5's metal gleamed under the dim tent light, each motion methodical, ritualistic. She'd done this thousands of times. Check the barrel, wipe the bolt, adjust the optics, breath steady. Somewhere outside, the team's laughter echoed faintly through the dark. She caught the sound of a guitar, off-tune but human. It reminded her of her brother again. He'd played like that once in the barracks, teasing her about being the scary sister with the long rifle. The memory twisted something in her chest. She exhaled slowly. The air smelled like oil and dust. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow I'll prove it again. Not to them, to myself. At 1:30 hours, the base was all shadows and movement. The operation was underway. "Phantom in position," she whispered into her mic, her voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. She was prone on the ridge, ghillie suit blending into the landscape. Through her scope, she saw the compound below, a collection of broken walls and flickering lights. Everything was too quiet. "No movement visible," she continued. "Copy that," came Mitchell's reply through the comm. "Strike team moving in. Maintain radio silence unless hostile contact confirmed." Her breathing slowed. The seconds stretched. Then a flicker. A shadow moved behind a window in a building that wasn't on the recon map. She adjusted the scope, focusing on the northeast corner structure. "Possible hostile, northeast corner, second floor," she whispered. "Negative," Mitchell replied immediately. "Intel shows that structure as abandoned. Proceed as planned." Sarah frowned. The building sat almost directly on the coordinates she carried on her neck. The exact same place her brother's convoy had fallen. The same ambush site. Her pulse quickened. She hesitated, but not for long. Through her scope, she saw the assault team reaching the outer wall. Then muzzle flashes. "Contact." Gunfire erupted, tracer rounds lighting up the night. Sarah exhaled once, centered her crosshairs, and squeezed the trigger. The first hostile dropped instantly. She shifted left, another. Then another. Her rhythm was mechanical, almost detached. She moved faster than thought, spot, exhale, squeeze, reload. But there were too many. "Multiple contacts," came Dawson's voice over the comm, panicked. "They knew we were coming, we're pinned." Sarah's chest tightened. "Fall back to the eastern exit," she said quickly. "I can cover you from here." No response. The radio crackled, then died. She knew what that meant. Without hesitation, Sarah slung her rifle, grabbed her sidearm, and began descending the ridge. The ground slipped under her boots as she slid into the darkness, her breath harsh through the mic. Inside the compound, chaos. Bullets ricocheted off concrete. The smell of smoke and metal filled the air. She moved low, precise, returning fire only when necessary. 3 hostiles down before she reached the inner yard. She found Mitchell crouched behind a broken wall, Dawson bleeding beside him. "Reeves," Mitchell blinked, disbelief etched across his face. "What the hell are you doing off position?" "Getting you out alive," she replied flatly, raising her rifle. "There's an underground tunnel system below this sector. It's not on your maps." "How could you possibly?" "Because I've been here before." She pulled down her hood. The night light caught the sweat on her skin and the tattoo on her neck. "These coordinates," she said quietly. "This is where my brother died 2 years ago. Same kind of setup, same kind of trap." Mitchell stared at her. Realization hit him like a physical blow. "Those coordinates," he muttered. "Collins had partial intel." "Collins was wrong," she cut in. "The hostages aren't here. This whole thing was bait, but I can get your men out." Before he could respond, a grenade landed meters away. Sarah didn't think. She moved. She threw herself over Dawson, shielding him with her body. The explosion tore through the ground, shrapnel slicing through her vest. Pain flared across her back, hot and sharp. When she looked up, her ears were ringing. "Why?" Dawson gasped, coughing, blood streaking his face. "Why'd you do that?" "Because that's what soldiers do," she said simply, forcing herself up. "Now move." Mitchell hesitated, eyes flicking from her to the burning compound. "Lead the way, Lieutenant." The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a collapsed storage unit, exactly where she remembered it. Smoke filled the air, and the compound behind them began to erupt, one explosion after another, chain reactions from the enemy's stored munitions. Sarah led them into the darkness, her flashlight cutting through the dust. Each step echoed in the tunnels, a sound she'd never forgotten. Behind them, war consumed the surface. Ahead, only silence. And in that silence, one thought pulsed in Sarah's mind like a heartbeat. This is where Daniel died, and this time no one else does. She could hear it again. The sound that had haunted her for 2 years, boots against the stone, distant gunfire muffled by dirt, the desperate gasps of men trying not to die underground. The tunnels beneath Fallujah were not built by engineers or soldiers. They were carved out by survivors, insurgents, smugglers, ghosts of wars long forgotten. The air was stale, thick with dust and gunpowder. Every breath scraped her lungs. 200 meters ahead," Sarah whispered, her voice low, steady. "There's a junction. We take the left passage. It leads to an exit near the old marketplace." Commander Mitchell nodded silently. He carried one of the wounded across his shoulders, his uniform streaked with blood. Dawson limped beside him, pale but alive, leaning heavily on the wall. Sarah's flashlight cut thin ribbons of light across the walls, symbols, old graffiti, warnings from another time. She recognized them. She remembered tracing them with her hand years ago, terrified and 19, waiting for her brother to return. He never did. The memory came in flashes, Daniel shouting for her to run, the thunder of gunfire, the explosion that buried the world in dust, her own scream swallowed by the collapse. Now, as the echoes of the past collided with the present, her breathing slowed. Control, always control. That was the sniper's creed. No matter the noise inside, the hands must stay steady. Mitchell's voice broke the silence. "How far to the exit?" "Not far," she said, glancing back, "but they're following us." The sound was faint, the metallic rattle of an AK magazine, the whisper of boots brushing rock. The enemy was in the tunnels. Dawson flinched at the sound. "They're tracking us." Sarah nodded. "They know the main routes, but not all of them. There's a dead-end split ahead. I can use it to slow them down." "You're bleeding," Mitchell said, catching the shimmer of red across her shoulder. "I'll manage." She didn't tell him how much it burned, or how her arm was going numb. Pain was irrelevant until everyone else was safe. The group pressed on, shadows slipping through tighter corridors. The walls seemed to close in, the ceiling dipping low enough that they had to crouch. The smell grew worse, smoke, mold, something else that lingered of decay. Dawson stumbled. Sarah caught him before he fell. For a moment their eyes met, and the mockery that once lived in his gaze was gone, replaced by something else. Fear, respect, guilt. "You saved me back there," he said quietly. "Don't make me regret it," she replied, a faint ghost of humor cutting through the tension. He managed a broken laugh. and it almost sounded human again. When they reached the junction, Sarah paused. Two paths, left led to escape, right a dead end, a perfect place for an ambush. She made her decision without hesitation. "Commander," she said, turning to Mitchell, "take the team. Follow the left tunnel. It'll lead you to a drainage exit behind the marketplace. From there, about a kilometer east to the secondary extraction point." "And you?" Mitchell asked. "I'll stay here." His expression hardened. "That's suicide, Reeves." "No," she said softly. "It's tactical. They don't know these tunnels. I do. I'll draw them down the right path, buy you time." Mitchell stared at her, seeing her not as the woman they joked about, not as the sniper they barely trusted, but as something else entirely. "You've done enough," he said. "Not yet." Gunfire echoed faintly in the distance, closer now. "Go," she ordered. "That's an order, Commander." There was a silence between them, a heavy one, like two soldiers standing on opposite ends of an unspoken truth. Then Mitchell nodded. "We'll send help." She gave him a small smile, not the polite kind, but the kind that said she'd already made peace with whatever came next. He turned and led the wounded down the left passage. Their footsteps faded. Sarah took a slow breath and turned off her light. Darkness swallowed her whole. She crouched near the intersection, rifle up, listening. Then movement. Shadows approached, faint murmurs in Arabic echoing through the corridor. She steadied her weapon, counting the voices. 5, maybe 6, no, 7. Too many for one woman, with a half-empty magazine. But she wasn't thinking about the odds. She was thinking about Daniel, about the way he'd looked at her that last morning before his convoy left the base, how he'd grinned, teasing her about overcleaning her rifle. "You know, sis," he'd said, "not every fight can be won from a mile away." He was right. The first enemy appeared around the corner, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. Sarah waited until it hit her wall, then fired once. The man fell before his light even hit the ground. Two more voices shouted. She fired again, moved, fired again. The sound in the tunnels was chaos, echoes bouncing in every direction, distorting her position. She used it, changed angles after every shot, creating the illusion of multiple shooters. The enemies hesitated, confused, shouting commands to ghosts. When her rifle ran dry, she switched to her sidearm. Short bursts, controlled, 1, 2, 3. When that emptied, silence. Then the crunch of gravel, someone still alive moving closer. She drew her knife, pressed her back against the wall. The shadow appeared in front of her, close enough to smell the dust on his uniform. She moved before he could react. One strike, then another, precise, efficient. When it was over, she was shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline. She knelt there in the dark for a long time, breathing in the silence she'd created. In that silence, she could almost hear her brother's voice. "You did good, Sarah. You did what you had to." She wiped the blood from her knife and reloaded what little she had left. When she finally turned on her flashlight again, the tunnel was painted in stillness. 7 bodies. 7 men who'd believed they were hunting prey until they met the ghost of Fallujah. Her shoulder throbbed. She touched the wound, grimacing. The bleeding had slowed, but she could feel the weakness spreading, a warmth that made her vision blur at the edges. Time to move. She followed the left tunnel, the same one she'd sent Mitchell down. It sloped upward, the air growing less suffocating with every step. She could hear the distant hum of wind, the sound of freedom. Then a voice in her earpiece crackled faintly. "Reeves, do you copy?" "Mitchell." Static, then again, "We're at the extraction point. We've got 2 wounded. Chopper inbound in 5. Where are you?" She pressed her comm unit. "Still in the tunnels. Give me 2 minutes." "Copy, we're holding." Her pace quickened. Each step was agony, but she kept moving. The light ahead grew brighter, faint at first, then blinding. When she finally emerged, dawn was breaking over the desert. The horizon glowed orange, the dust painting everything in muted gold. The helicopter's rotors thundered in the distance. Mitchell saw her first, a dark figure rising from the earth, rifle slung, bloodied but walking. "Hold," he shouted to the pilot. "We've got one more." She reached the landing zone just as the wind from the blades blasted across her face. The sun cut through the haze, and for the first time in hours, she let herself breathe. Mitchell grabbed her arm, pulling her aboard. The chopper lifted, dust swirling below. For a moment, she just sat there silent, staring at the city shrinking beneath them. Fallujah, the city that took her brother, the city that had tried to take her again. And yet here she was alive. Across from her, Dawson was staring. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said everything. Respect, gratitude, guilt. Mitchell sat beside her, his voice low, steady over the roar of the engines. 17 confirmed kills, he said quietly, scanning the mission data. You held off an entire squad down there, single-handedly. Sarah didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the coordinates on her neck disappeared beneath the rising sun. After a long silence, Mitchell spoke again. "I was wrong about you." She turned to him, expression unreadable. "You weren't wrong," she said softly. "You just didn't know me yet." He nodded once slowly, and for the first time the cold commander's eyes softened. The chopper climbed higher, the city faded behind them. Sarah leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. She could still feel the heat of the explosion on her skin, the dust in her throat, the echo of her brother's last words in her ears. She closed her eyes and whispered to the wind, barely audible over the engine's hum. "I got them out, Danny." No answer came, but she didn't need one. She could feel it, that quiet, heavy peace that came only after the impossible. Somewhere in the distance, the desert stretched endless and quiet, waiting for the next mission, the next storm. And inside that helicopter, among the men who had once mocked her tattoo, silence reigned. Not the silence of indifference, but of respect. The kind earned only once. The kind that stays forever. The helicopter landed hard. Dust swirled across the landing zone as medics rushed in, shouting over the roar of rotors. The air smelled like jet fuel and blood, a mix that never really left a soldier's memory. Sarah Reeves stepped off last. Her boots hit the dirt, knees trembling, body running on the last fumes of adrenaline. The moment her boots met solid ground, the world felt heavier. She should have collapsed. She didn't. Instead, she straightened, every muscle screaming, and walked forward through the chaos like a ghost who hadn't realized she was still alive. The medics reached for her first, seeing the streaks of red across her uniform, the cuts, the blood dried into her sleeves. "I'm fine," she said simply. Her voice carried more steel than sound. "See to the others." They hesitated, then obeyed. Mitchell stood a few meters away, headset off, speaking to HQ over a secure line. His posture was stiff, his face unreadable. The kind of look leaders wear when they've seen something they can't quite explain. Sarah felt eyes on her again, the same way they had stared before the mission. But this time, it wasn't mockery. This time, no one said a word. Dawson sat on the stretcher nearby, head bandaged, watching her like he was still trying to process what he'd seen in that tunnel. She gave him a small nod. He didn't smile, didn't joke, just nodded back. It was enough. When she finally entered the debriefing tent hours later, the air inside was colder, quieter. Mitchell stood at the table, reviewing a tablet, while a few intelligence officers murmured to each other in the background. She waited silently until he looked up. "Lieutenant Reeves," he said, voice measured, "sit down." She did. For a moment, there was only the hum of the air conditioner. Then Mitchell placed the tablet down. 17 confirmed enemy KIA. 2 friendly wounded, no fatalities. Extraction successful. Hostages confirmed recovered at secondary site 12 hours later. He paused, watching her. All thanks to you. Sarah said nothing. Praise had never sat comfortably with her. He continued, slower this time. What you did down there, the way you navigated that tunnel system, it's being reviewed by command as unprecedented. She met his gaze evenly. I just did what I had to, sir. That's the thing, he said quietly. Most don't. The words hung in the air like something sacred, fragile. Mitchell leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. Tell me something, Lieutenant. Why didn't you mention those coordinates before the mission? She hesitated. The question hit deeper than he probably realized. I tried, she said softly. Not directly, but when I suggested the alternate position, I knew something was off. I didn't want to bring personal history into a tactical discussion. It doesn't work well in these rooms. Mitchell studied her. You thought they wouldn't listen. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. He leaned back, sighing quietly. You were right, we didn't. For the first time, the commander's tone wasn't cold or authoritative. It was human. He rubbed his temples, exhaling. I read your file, Reeves. 9 deployments, multiple commendations, no disciplinary marks. You've been to more hellholes than most operators twice your rank. So why, he paused, searching for words, why keep signing up? Sarah looked past him, her eyes tracing the tent wall where the fabric rippled with the wind. Because it's unfinished, she said quietly. Unfinished. She nodded. Every time I come back, I tell myself I'll stop, but then I think about the people who didn't. My brother. The ones who trusted bad intel, who never got the chance to change the plan. I can't explain it, sir. It's not about revenge. It's about making something right that'll never really be right. Mitchell was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, You ever think about leaving? Every day, she said, almost smiling. And then something happens that reminds me why I can't. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's what separates people like you from the rest of us. Sarah shook her head. No, it's what breaks us faster. The honesty in her voice unsettled him more than any battlefield could. He stood, closing the tablet. You're off duty for 72 hours. Medical will clear you for field work after that. She rose, saluting automatically. Understood. As she turned to leave, he said, Reeves. She stopped. You did good. She didn't look back, just replied, We all did. Outside, the sun had set. The base was quieter now, the kind of quiet that always followed missions like this, relief mixed with exhaustion, a silence thick enough to swallow memories whole. Sarah walked toward the showers, each step heavier than the last. Her back throbbed from shrapnel, her arms still burned, but none of it compared to the ache beneath her ribs. The ache that came from surviving again. Steam filled the small shower tent. The first touch of water stung her wounds, but she didn't move. She closed her eyes, letting the dirt and blood wash away, watching the red trail spiral down the drain. Her reflection in the small mirror afterward startled her, eyes red, face drawn but alive. She reached up, brushing wet hair aside, revealing the black lines etched into her skin. The coordinates glistened under the dim light. She remembered the day she'd gotten them. A week after Daniel's death, she sat in a small shop outside Ramadi, surrounded by the hum of generators and the distant echo of gunfire. The tattoo artist hadn't asked questions. He just nodded when she handed him the scrap of paper. Coordinates, he'd asked. Yeah, she'd said, a promise. Now, as she looked at it again, she whispered softly to her reflection, You'd hate that I did this, Danny. But in her heart, she knew he wouldn't. He'd understand. When she left the showers, the camp was quiet, the kind of quiet that reminded her of cemeteries. The stars stretched endless above the desert, unbothered by the chaos below. She sat alone outside her quarters, boots unlaced, staring at the horizon. That's when Dawson appeared. He hesitated before speaking. "Mind if I sit?" She nodded. He lowered himself beside her, groaning slightly. His arm was bandaged, his face stitched. He looked older than he had a day ago. "Word travels fast," he said after a long pause. "They're already calling you the ghost of Fallujah." She gave a quiet chuckle. "I've been called worse." He stared at the ground. "I just wanted to say thank you." "You already did." "Not properly." He turned to her, voice quieter. "When you threw yourself over me, I thought you were insane. Then I realized you weren't saving me because you liked me. You were saving me because that's just who you are." Sarah didn't respond. He rubbed his face with his good hand. "I said a lot of stupid things before this mission, about you, the tattoo, the jokes. I was an ass." "Yeah," she said simply. He huffed a laugh. "You're not gonna let me off easy, are you?" "Nope." Another long silence stretched between them. Finally, Dawson said, "I don't know what that tattoo means and it's not my business, but whatever it stands for, it saved our lives. So, thank you." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It's where I lost my brother," she said quietly. 2 years ago, same city, same type of ambush. Those coordinates, they remind me to trust my instincts, even when no one else does." Dawson's mouth opened, then closed. He didn't know what to say. After a while he said softly, "I get it now, why you don't say much." "Words don't change people," she said. "Time does." He nodded. "Guess I needed both." They sat there in silence as the wind swept across the base, carrying with it the faint sound of laughter from the far tents, life going on as it always did. When Dawson finally stood, he said, "You're a better soldier than most of us'll ever be, Reeves." "Don't tell anyone," she said, and this time he laughed for real. After he left, Sarah looked up at the stars again. For the first time in a long while, they didn't feel so far away. Behind her, the faint hum of a generator filled the air, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And somewhere deep inside, she realized something. It wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about legacy. About what she'd leave behind for the next one, who walked into that room full of silence and doubt. She touched the tattoo again, tracing the lines with her fingertips. "Still here," she whispered to herself, "still standing." The wind carried the words away, but she didn't need to hear them again. She felt them in her blood, in her scars, in the silence that followed every mission. Sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted. 3 weeks later, the desert felt quieter. Time had softened the memory of that night, but only in the way sand softens stone. The edges remained, buried but sharp. The tunnels, the blood, the heat of the explosion, it all lived somewhere behind Sarah Reeves's eyes. At the forward operating base, the world moved on as it always did after missions. New intel came in. New names filled the rosters. The dead were filed away under honors and remembrance. And yet, in one corner of the compound, something had shifted. When Sarah walked across the yard now, the laughter stopped for a different reason. Not out of ridicule, out of respect. They still whispered, soldiers always did, but the tone was different. "That's her. The sniper from Fallujah. 17 confirmed in one night. The one with the coordinates." She ignored most of it. Fame in this world was just another burden. But when she saw the younger recruits straightening as she passed, standing a little taller, she didn't look away. She let them see that it was possible. That strength didn't need noise to exist. The official commendation ceremony was held on a Thursday morning. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that almost felt cruel, too calm for the weight it carried. Rows of soldiers stood at attention on the parade ground, uniforms pressed, boots aligned like clockwork. Sarah stood in the front line, eyes fixed ahead. The wound on her shoulder had mostly healed, though the ache remained, a reminder, like all the others, that healing didn't mean forgetting. Commander Mitchell stepped up to the podium. His presence was the same as ever, straight-backed, authoritative, but there was something new in his expression, a humility she hadn't seen before. 2 weeks ago, he began, his voice steady, Task Force Cerberus engaged in what was supposed to be a standard hostage extraction operation in eastern Fallujah. It was. He paused, letting the silence breathe. It was an ambush, one that would have cost every man on that mission their lives, had it not been for one of our own. Every gaze shifted toward her. Mitchell looked down at the document in his hands, then back at the crowd. Lieutenant Sarah Reeves, he said, his voice carrying across the field, displayed extraordinary courage, tactical insight, and selflessness under fire. Her actions directly resulted in the survival of 6 members of her team and the successful recovery of key intelligence that led to the rescue of the hostages 12 hours later. She is hereby recommended for the Navy Cross. A ripple went through the ranks, the sound of quiet disbelief, pride, awe. Sarah felt her chest tighten, not out of pride, but from the sheer unfamiliarity of being seen. Mitchell continued, We often speak of valor in terms of victory, the number of enemies defeated, the missions completed. But sometimes, valor is quieter. Sometimes it's one soldier making a decision no one will ever know about. Sometimes it's trust in yourself when no one else will listen. His eyes met hers briefly. And sometimes, he added softly, it's a tattoo that reminds us where we came from and what we refuse to forget. The silence that followed was absolute. Then applause. Not the formal kind, not the stiff, obligatory rhythm of soldiers trained to follow orders. It was different, raw, uneven, human. Sarah stood there, still as stone, while the sound washed over her. For a moment, she let herself feel it, the weight of recognition, the quiet redemption that didn't erase the pain but gave it meaning. When the ceremony ended, soldiers approached her one by one. Some shook her hand, some just nodded, and then Dawson appeared, limping slightly, his face freshly scarred but smiling. We owe you our lives, he said simply, every one of us. I was wrong about you, Reeves, we all were. Sarah looked at him, and for the first time she allowed a faint smile. Took you long enough. He laughed, shaking his head. Guess I needed to get shot at to learn some manners. Seems to work for most men around here, she said dryly. Their laughter faded into something more comfortable, a quiet understanding between soldiers who had seen too much and survived anyway. Later that afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and the heat softened, Sarah began packing her gear. Her deployment with the task force was officially over. Orders had come through. Reassignment to Sniper Training Command. Teach, train, pass it on. The small room she'd been given was nearly bare now, just her rifle case, her duffel, and a folded flag resting on the bed. Her brother. The door opened behind her. Permission to enter, Mitchell's voice. She didn't look up. You don't need permission, sir. He stepped inside, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was strange now, no longer tense, but not easy either. Finally, he said, You're leaving us. Orders are orders. He nodded. I've been authorized to offer you a permanent post with this unit. Advisory position, training integration. You'd stay attached to Cerberus officially. Sarah zipped her bag halfway, then paused. Why? Because we need someone like you, he said simply. Someone who knows what it means to lead when no one's looking. Someone who doesn't wait for permission to do what's right. She turned to face him, and because the men respect me now, right? He hesitated, then said, because they learned from you. Sarah considered that. Then she walked to the desk, picked up her dog tags, and let them dangle from her fingers. Those coordinates on my neck, she said quietly, they aren't just where my brother died. They're where I learned what leadership costs, what it means to put the mission and your people above everything. You can't teach that in a briefing room. Mitchell nodded slowly. Is that a yes? On one condition, she said, stepping closer. Next time someone on your team has intel, someone who's seen something, lived something, you listen. Doesn't matter what gender, rank, or tattoo they've got. He smiled faintly. Deal. When he extended his hand, she shook it. His grip was firm, respectful, and this time she felt it, the absence of doubt. As he turned to leave, he stopped at the doorway. You know, he said, glancing back, I used to think leadership was about control, about making the right calls, but you taught me it's about trust. Sarah tilted her head. Took you long enough. He smiled, a little sad. Seems to work for most commanders around here. When he was gone, she sat on the bed beside her duffel, staring at the folded flag. The light from the window caught the edges of her tattoo. The black lines shimmered against her skin like a compass pointing not to a place, but to everything she'd lost, everything she'd found, and everything she still refused to surrender. That night the base was quiet again. No briefing schedules, no gunfire, just the wind moving through the desert, the kind that carried stories if you listened closely enough. Sarah stood near the range, watching a group of recruits practice in the distance. Their shots were sloppy, wide groupings, poor control, but the effort was there. She watched them correct each other, shoulders tense, breaths uneven. Then she noticed one of them, a young woman, barely 20, standing apart from the group. The others laughed quietly at her missed shots. Sarah recognized that look, the one that said, I don't belong here, but I'll prove it anyway. She walked toward her, slow and unassuming. The girl straightened immediately. Ma'am. Relax, Sarah said, stopping beside her. You're flinching on the trigger pull. The recruit nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Sarah gestured to the rifle. Show me your stance. The girl adjusted her footing. Sarah reached over, shifted her elbow slightly, then said, Now breathe. Don't think about the shot, just listen to it. The girl did. One slow exhale, then the rifle cracked. The target's center lit up red. Her mouth fell open. I hit it. Sarah gave a small nod. You did. The recruit turned, smiling, then hesitated. You're Lieutenant Reeves, aren't you? The one from... Sarah cut her off gently. Doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what you do when no one believes you can. The girl nodded, eyes wide, the words sinking in deeper than she probably realized. As Sarah turned to leave, the recruit said quietly, Thank you, ma'am. Sarah paused, glancing over her shoulder. You'll thank me when you teach the next one. She walked away, the sun catching the edges of her hood, the faint shimmer of the coordinates visible once more. In the distance, a chopper took off, dust rising in slow spirals. The recruits continued firing. The world kept moving. And somewhere in the rhythm of it, the heartbeat of a base that had seen too much and still carried on, Sarah Reeves felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind born from absence of war, but the kind that lives quietly inside those who have faced it and learned to breathe anyway. As she looked at the horizon, she thought of Daniel again, of his laughter, of his words, of the way he'd believed in her long before anyone else did. Guess I kept my promise, she whispered. The wind didn't answer, but it didn't need to. It carried her voice across the sand, where it would fade like everything else in this place, not forgotten, just absorbed. And somewhere far beyond the desert, beyond medals, beyond rank or recognition, the meaning of those coordinates remained what it had always been, not a place of death, but a place of becoming. Sometimes the world only listens when you bleed for it. But sometimes the quietest acts speak the loudest. And dignity, it doesn't ask for applause. It simply acts. 6 months later, the desert winds had changed. The forward base had given way to something quieter, an inland training compound where the sound of gunfire was steady but never panicked, where every echo belonged to a student learning how to breathe between heartbeats. Lieutenant Sarah Reeves had traded missions for mentorship. Her world was no longer measured in distances and kill counts, but in the soft corrections of posture, the stillness before the shot, and the quiet determination in a recruit's eyes. The range stretched for miles, sand, targets, sunlight bleeding across the horizon. And in the middle of it all her, calm, grounded, watching. "Slow your breathing," she said softly. The young man beside her adjusted his grip, sweat beading on his temple. "Ma'am, I—" "Don't talk," she interrupted gently. "Listen." He inhaled, exhaled. The rifle cracked. The round hit dead center. Sarah nodded. "Now do it again." Training snipers wasn't about teaching them to shoot. It was about teaching them to wait, to believe in silence, to master the kind of patience that could feel like madness. She walked down the line of recruits, each one focused, disciplined, sweating under the Iraqi sun. Most didn't know her story. Some had heard pieces, rumors, legends. The ghost of Fallujah, the woman who took 17 lives and saved 6 more, the one with the tattoo. She let them wonder. Legends had their use. They taught before words could. At night, when the base quieted, she sat alone in her quarters, rifle across her lap, cleaning it the same way she had since the beginning. Every stroke of the cloth was a memory, every sound of the bolt a heartbeat. The coordinates on her neck caught the light from the lamp, still raised, still there. Sometimes she caught herself tracing them without thinking. They weren't just ink anymore, they were time. The knock on her door that evening was soft. "Come in," she said. Commander Mitchell stepped through, now wearing a lighter uniform, the kind officers wore when they'd traded field command for oversight. He looked older, more tired, but steadier somehow. "You keep this place running smooth," he said, glancing around. "The instructors say you've turned a bunch of rookies into ghosts." She smirked faintly. "Ghosts are quiet, these kids are loud." Mitchell chuckled. "They're getting there, you've done good work here." Sarah wiped her hands on a rag. "Not the kind of work that gets medals." "Maybe not," he said, his tone softer now, "but it's the kind that lasts." For a moment they just stood there, commander and sniper, mentor and student, teacher and learner, roles that kept shifting between them like sand in the wind. Mitchell broke the silence. "You ever miss it?" "The field?" she asked. He nodded. She thought about it, the rush of the hunt, the adrenaline, the silence before a trigger pull, the terrible clarity that came with combat. She thought about her brother's voice, still echoing in those tunnels, and the smell of smoke that never quite left her clothes. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not the way I used to. It's different now." "How so?" "I used to think it was about proving something," she said. "Now it's about leaving something behind, making sure the next ones don't make the same mistakes we did." He nodded slowly. "You know, the story of Fallujah's been circulating through every special operations briefing on the continent. They talk about you like you're a myth." Sarah smiled faintly. "Myths have endings, sir, people don't." Mitchell studied her. "What's next for you, Reeves?" She shrugged. "Keep training, keep listening, maybe that's enough." He started to reply, but a voice came through his radio. Static, then words, urgent. "Commander Mitchell, sir, priority message. You'll want to hear this." He excused himself and stepped outside to take it. Sarah stayed where she was, staring at the empty doorway. When he came back in, his expression had changed. "What is it?" she asked. "Recon team operating near the Syrian border. 2 snipers pinned. 1 confirmed KIA. They're calling for remote support and Overwatch training reinforcement. Command wants an advisor on site." Sarah set the rag down. "When?" "Wheels up in 3 hours." Silence. "You don't have to go," Mitchell said. "You've done enough." She met his eyes. "That's what they said last time." He didn't argue, he knew better. 3 hours later, the helicopter blades cut through the night again. Sarah sat inside, the vibration thrumming through her bones. Around her, a smaller team of instructors sat in silence, young, nervous, watching her. She didn't speak much. She never did before an op. As the pilot announced descent, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. That old rhythm, the heartbeat of memory and instinct. The LZ was chaos, burning debris, scattered gear, and the faint echo of gunfire from the hills. Sarah crouched as the chopper touched down, scanning the terrain. Shadows moved in the distance. The desert smelled like smoke again. "Overwatch here," she said into her comm. "I've got movement 2 clicks north, taking position." Her students followed, eyes wide, adrenaline pulsing. She moved through the darkness like she'd never left it. The years fell away. She wasn't an instructor anymore. She was the rifle again, the silence again. They reached the ridge. Sarah dropped prone, setting her rifle in place. Through the scope, she could see the pinned team, 2 silhouettes crouched behind a broken vehicle, muzzle flashes lighting the sand around them. "Targets 4 hostiles, possibly 5, she whispered. "Range 800, wind 3.2 from the east." The young sniper beside her hesitated. "Ma'am, do I?" "Take your time," she said. "Breathe. Wait for the wind to settle." He did. The shot cracked. 1 hostile dropped instantly. Sarah smiled faintly. "Good, now keep going." The next minutes unfolded in silence. The rookies moved with growing confidence. Their shots found rhythm, precision, calm. When it was over, the desert went still again. The pinned snipers emerged from behind the vehicle, signaling all clear. The radio came alive with relief, cheers, gratitude. Sarah stayed prone a moment longer, watching through her scope as the dawn began to bloom over the horizon. The color reminded her of the morning after Fallujah. That same faint light on the sand. That same ache in her chest that wasn't pain, but something deeper. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Still here, Danny." Later, as they flew back to base, the young sniper beside her said quietly, "Ma'am, I didn't think I could do it. I froze, I thought." "You didn't freeze," she said. "You listened." He nodded, but she could tell he didn't fully understand yet. He would, one day. Back at the compound, the team dispersed. Sarah stayed behind, sitting near the range again, cleaning her rifle as the sun set. Mitchell approached, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Heard you made quite an impression," he said. "Kids did good," she replied. "They just needed someone to believe they could." He handed her a mug. "Seems to be your specialty." They sat in silence for a while, watching the horizon fade into gold. Finally, Mitchell said, "You know, every time I think I understand what strength looks like, you change the definition." Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "Strength isn't what people think it is, sir. It's not loud. It's not about who leads. It's about who listens, who stays when it hurts." He looked at her, thoughtful. "You think the world will ever understand that?" She took a sip of her coffee, eyes on the distant hills. "Maybe, maybe not, but the right people will." When he left, she sat there alone, the air cooling around her, the coordinates on her neck glinting faintly in the last light. The ghost of Fallujah, the legend, the myth. She didn't feel like any of those things. She just felt human, tired, grateful, alive. And somewhere deep inside her, she knew the truth she'd been running from for years, that the mission had never really been about vengeance or redemption. It had always been about learning how to live after both. As night fell, a single shot echoed from the far range, one of her students still practicing. The sound rolled across the sand like a heartbeat. Sarah smiled. The desert didn't answer, but she didn't need it to. Sometimes, survival isn't about the wars you win. It's about the ones you outlast. And dignity, it doesn't need to be remembered. It just needs to keep breathing. Going. The second shot rang out, then a third. Each echo rolled across the dunes like a heartbeat. Sarah scanned through her scope, adjusting her focus, watching the young sniper steady himself after every recoil. His breathing synced with hers, slow, deliberate, almost meditative. He was learning. He was becoming. "Last one," she whispered. He nodded, barely moving. The trigger broke clean. The final hostile dropped, silent and sudden. Then stillness. The kind of silence that only comes after violence, when the desert itself seems to hold its breath. Clear came the call from the pin team. "All hostiles down, we're safe." Sarah lowered her rifle, exhaling deeply. For a moment she didn't move. The world had gone so quiet she could hear her own pulse again, that familiar rhythm that once ruled her life. The young sniper beside her turned, his face pale with disbelief. "Ma'am, we did it." She gave a small nod. "You did it." When the extraction chopper arrived, the wind kicked up around them again, sand swirling through the moonlight. The mission was done, but Sarah stayed kneeling, staring at the horizon. She could almost see the ridge from Fallujah in her mind. The same stars, the same dust, the same smell of gunpowder carried by the wind. And for the first time in years, it didn't hurt as much to remember. Back at the base, the younger instructors were buzzing. They'd watched her work, watched the way she led, not with orders but with silence, with example. Someone whispered it again, half in awe. "That's her, the ghost." Sarah brushed past them quietly, expression unreadable. The myth was theirs now, not hers. Myths belonged to those who needed them. She entered the empty classroom, flicking the light on. Maps lined the walls, markers scattered the desk. And on the board, in small, careful handwriting, were the words she'd written months ago. "A sniper's job isn't to take life, it's to give others the chance to keep theirs." She stood there for a long time, staring at the words. Then she erased them slowly, one stroke at a time. Not because they weren't true, but because they didn't need to be said anymore. The people here already understood. She turned to leave, but Mitchell was standing in the doorway again. "Word just came down from command," he said. "They're upgrading your commendation recommendation. It's official, Reeves. The Navy Cross is approved." Sarah blinked once. "You serious?" "Paperwork signed. They'll want a ceremony, cameras, interviews." He paused, smiling faintly. "You're going to hate it." She chuckled softly. "Already do." He studied her, trying to read what lay behind that calm exterior. Most people would be thrilled. "I'm not most people," she said quietly. "You know that by now." "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly why they gave it to you." She leaned against the desk, thoughtful. "You ever think medals are just a way to make peace with what it cost?" Mitchell considered it. Maybe, but sometimes it's a way to remind everyone else what that cost was worth. She didn't answer, just looked out the window toward the range, where the next generation was already setting up targets in the morning light. "You trained them well," he said finally. "They'll carry this forward." Sarah nodded, her gaze soft. "That's all I ever wanted." Mitchell smiled. "You know, there's talk about you going stateside. Sniper program overhaul. They want you to lead it." She raised an eyebrow. "And leave all this?" He shrugged. "Could be a new chapter. You've earned one." Sarah didn't reply right away. The word chapter lingered with her. Not ending, chapter. A continuation. A chance to teach more than just trigger discipline and marksmanship. "Maybe," she said at last, "but I'm not done here yet." "Fair enough." He started to leave, then turned. "By the way, one of the rookies told me they found a quote written on the wall of the range house. Said it was from you." Sarah frowned. "What quote?" He smiled. "Sometimes the only difference between surviving and living is the reason you choose to stay." She tilted her head. "That doesn't sound like me." "Maybe it does now," he said and walked out. That evening, Sarah stood outside her quarters again. The wind had picked up, warm, heavy, whispering through the tents. The smell of oil and sand mixed in the air. Across the yard, recruits laughed around a small fire. It reminded her of nights long ago, before the tunnels, before the scars, before she became something people whispered about instead of spoke to. She sat down on the steps, resting her rifle beside her. The sky above was wide and endless, stars bright enough to hurt the eyes. She thought of Daniel again, his voice, his laughter, his quiet bravery. The way he always said, "You don't get to pick the things worth fighting for, Sarah. They pick you." She smiled faintly at the memory. "You were right," she murmured. Footsteps approached behind her. It was the young sniper from the mission, still green but different now, sharper, calmer. "Ma'am?" he asked hesitantly. She glanced back, couldn't sleep. He shook his head. "I wanted to say something. Out there, when you told me to breathe, I thought about quitting. I was scared. You made it feel like it wasn't just about shooting." "It never is," she said. "It's about choosing who you become when you pull that trigger." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I think I get that now." She studied him for a moment, then said, "Good. Then don't waste it." He straightened. "Yes, ma'am." When he turned to go, she called after him, "What's your name, soldier?" He smiled awkwardly. "Ramirez, ma'am." "Ramirez," she repeated softly. "Next time someone tells you you're not ready, remember tonight. Remember that fear doesn't mean weakness. It means you're still human." He nodded, eyes bright. "Thank you, ma'am." After he left, she looked back up at the stars. A shooting star streaked across the horizon, brief, bright, silent. For a moment, she imagined her brother's voice carried on its trail. "Still here, huh?" "Still here," she whispered back. "Always." Weeks passed. The desert began to cool, shifting into the kind of dry winter that bit at the bones but cleared the sky. Sarah kept training, kept teaching, kept listening. But one morning, a new order came in. Reassignment, stateside command, advanced sniper program. It was time. When she boarded the aircraft that would take her home, she turned one last time toward the range. The recruits stood at attention along the fence, rifles across their backs, silent as the engines spun up. Mitchell stood in front of them, saluting. She returned the gesture, then climbed aboard. As the transport lifted, she looked out over the endless sand. The desert shimmered in the sunrise, gold and cruel and beautiful. The place that had taken so much, and somehow given something back. Her reflection in the window caught the light. The tattoo gleamed faintly beneath her collar. Not as a scar, not as pain, but as proof. Proof that survival could be grace, and silence could be strength. She smiled faintly. The engines roared, the bass grew small below. And Sarah Reeves, once the soldier mocked for her tattoo, flew toward a horizon she had finally earned. Not to escape the past, but to honor it. Because sometimes the bravest thing a soldier can do is not to fight another battle, but to teach others how to survive their own. And as the sky opened before her, vast and bright, Sarah closed her eyes and let the sunlight find her face. Still here, still standing, still human. The transport touched down at Dover under a heavy gray sky. Cold air rolled in as the ramp dropped, the kind that carried silence, thick, unspoken, heavier than words. Sarah Reeves stepped out slowly, boots hitting the tarmac, duffel slung over her shoulder. The noise of the engines faded behind her. The hum of life resumed ahead, briefing calls, vehicles, orders, but none of it touched her. After years of sand and gunfire, the quiet of home felt foreign. A black sedan waited at the end of the strip. An officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Lieutenant Reeves, this way, ma'am." She followed without a word, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. The ride to the Naval Command Center was long, filled with the low hum of the engine and the rhythm of raindrops against glass. Every mile away from the desert felt like a confession she hadn't made yet. Inside the new command facility, fluorescent lights replaced the sun. Hallways smelled like antiseptic and paper, too clean for the kind of ghost she carried. A woman from operations, hair in a tight bun, met her in the lobby. "Welcome to Quantico, Lieutenant. Congratulations on your assignment. You'll be heading the new long-range precision program. We've been expecting you." Sarah nodded faintly, glad to be here. But she wasn't sure she was. Her new quarters were small, neat, quiet, sterile. A cot, a desk, a single window that faced a field of wet grass instead of dunes. She unpacked slowly, rifle case, uniform, a folded flag, her brother. She placed it on the shelf just above the desk, then sat down and stared at it for a long time. "You'd laugh at this, Danny. Your sister teaching classes while the world keeps spinning." Her voice echoed softly in the room. It sounded older than she remembered. When training began the next week, the students looked at her with the same cautious reverence she'd seen before, whispers of her reputation already floating through the halls. She ignored it. "Name, rank," she said to the first row. Each stood and spoke. Voices trembled, some too loud, some too soft, nerves in every syllable. "Sniping," she began, "isn't about perfection. It's about control, of fear, of breath, of yourself. Anyone can fire a weapon. Not everyone can hold still while the world falls apart around them." The room quieted, every pair of eyes locked on her. "You'll learn the math, the wind, the angles, but none of that will save you if you don't understand the silence. Out there, silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of choice." She paused, letting that sink in. "Most people think this job is about killing," she added softly. "It is. It's about timing, about giving the ones next to you another second to live." Someone in the back swallowed hard. Another nodded slightly. The message landed. As weeks passed, Sarah fell into rhythm again. Early mornings, range drills, field simulations. The air here smelled like rain instead of dust, but the discipline was the same. She found herself watching her students not for aim but for heart, who blinked when the shot went off, who breathed too fast, who carried something heavy behind their silence. She saw herself in too many of them. One afternoon, a trainee, a young woman named Jacobs, approached her after class. "Ma'am," she said hesitantly, "is it true about the tattoo?" Sarah turned slowly. "What about it?" "They say it's coordinates," Jacobs said quickly. "A mission site. People talk, I didn't mean." Sarah held up a hand. "It's fine." She looked out across the range, the wind stirring the flags. "Yes, coordinates. A place I lost someone, a place I learned who I was." Jacobs nodded, unsure if she should say more. Sarah added, quieter, "You'll have your own coordinates one day. Not on your skin, but in your memory. Everyone does." Jacobs frowned. "What if I'm not ready?" Sarah smiled faintly. "No one ever is." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the sound of distant thunder rolling through Virginia. Her reflection stared back, older, quieter, her eyes carrying a lifetime of noise. The tattoo glimmered faintly under the light. She remembered Fallujah, the tunnels, the screams, Mitchell's voice over the comms, Dawson bleeding in the dust, the moment she'd thrown herself over him. And she remembered Daniel, always Daniel. She told herself she'd moved on, but grief was a tide, not a wound. It receded, it returned. Her phone buzzed, a message from Mitchell. "MITCHELL, how civilian command life." Sarah, still learning how to sit still. "MITCHELL, you never were good at that." Sarah, neither were you. "MITCHELL, we're deploying again next month. Iraq theater, different city, thought you'd want to know." Sarah, you looking for approval? "MITCHELL, just respect." Sarah, you already earned it. She stared at the screen for a long moment before typing one last line. "Sarah, keep them alive." She set the phone down. Rain traced lines down the window. The next morning her class assembled on the range again. She stood before them, wind cutting across the open field, the smell of grass sharp in the air. "Today," she said, "you're going to learn what distance feels like. Not meters, not yards, the kind of distance you can't measure with math." The students looked confused. "You'll take your shots," she said, "but then you'll walk to the target, every single one. You'll see what you did. You'll see the cost. You'll understand that precision isn't about power, it's about responsibility." They hesitated, then nodded. Hours later, when the last student finished the walk, Sarah saw it in their faces, the understanding, the quiet shift that happens when someone sees their work up close. When they dismissed, Jacobs approached again. "Ma'am, I think I get it now." Sarah tilted her head. "Get what?" "The silence," Jacobs said. "It's not peace, is it? It's weight." Sarah smiled softly. "Yeah, it's weight." As the recruits left, Sarah lingered at the edge of the field. The wind tugged gently at her collar. For a moment, she let it fall just enough for the tattoo to catch the light. Then she pulled it back up, turned toward the barracks, and walked away. Somewhere far beyond the Atlantic, the desert still slept. And the legend of the ghost of Fallujah still moved like a whisper among soldiers who'd never met her, but all felt her shadow. Because some stories don't fade. They just pass their silence to those who need it most. The wind howled against the glass, like it was trying to remind her where she came from. Sarah Reeves sat alone in the lecture hall, the lights dimmed, the projector humming softly in the corner. Rows of empty seats stretched before her, dozens of lives that would soon sit here, each carrying their own weight, their own coordinates. On the screen behind her was a single image, a desert ridge at dawn, the same ridge she'd lain on all those years ago. It wasn't part of the curriculum, it wasn't even supposed to be there, but she couldn't delete it. Some ghosts you don't erase, you just learn to teach through them. She heard footsteps in the hallway, then a voice, steady, familiar. "Room's darker than I expected," said Commander Mitchell. Sarah looked up, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You always show up unannounced, sir." He shrugged, stepping inside. His uniform was lighter now, stateside issue, but his presence hadn't changed. "Old habits, hope I'm not interrupting." "Just thinking," she said, "about the next class." Mitchell nodded toward the image on the screen. "Fallujah." She didn't answer immediately. "It's strange," she said finally. "I used to think that place defined me. Now it just reminds me I survived it." He folded his arms, studying her. "Survival's a kind of definition, too." Sarah glanced back at the photo. "Maybe, but it's not enough anymore." He sat down in the front row, elbows on his knees. "Then what is?" She took a breath, "Teaching them to carry what we couldn't put down." The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, just honest. Mitchell exhaled slowly. "You know, Reeves, sometimes I think the only reason I came home in one piece was because you didn't let me die out there." Sarah smiled faintly. "You would have done the same." "Not like you did." She looked at him, the weight of everything between them, years, loss, respect, settling into the quiet. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "how many times we've walked past someone who's still fighting a war no one can see?" He nodded slowly. "Every day." They sat like that for a long time, the projector light painting soft shadows across the floor. Finally, Mitchell stood. "I won't stay long. Just wanted to tell you the board approved your proposal. The program's getting permanent funding. They're calling it the Reeves Initiative." Sarah froze. "The what?" He smiled. "You built this from nothing. The leadership thinks it should carry your name." She shook her head. "That's not necessary." "Maybe not," he said, "but it's right." She stared at the photo again. The ridge, the dawn, the faint silhouette of her rifle buried in shadow. "If it means these kids learn to come home in one piece, then fine. But make sure they understand, it's not about me." Mitchell smiled softly. "It never was." He walked to the door, pausing with one hand on the frame. You're a rare thing, Reeves, a soldier who never stopped being human. She chuckled quietly. Don't tell anyone, it might ruin the legend. Mitchell grinned. Take care of yourself, Ghost. When he was gone, the room fell silent again. The image on the screen flickered once, then faded to black. Sarah sat there for a while longer, the echo of his words hanging in the air. Then she stood, gathering her notes. As she turned off the projector, the darkness settled like a blanket. Outside, the rain had stopped. The night air smelled clean, alive. She walked across the empty courtyard toward the barracks, the pavement glistening under the lights. Somewhere in the distance, she heard laughter, young voices, new ones, hopeful ones. She stopped under a lamppost, looking up at the stars. They seemed closer tonight, brighter, like they'd been waiting for her to notice them again. A voice from memory drifted through her mind, her brother's, soft and certain. You can't live your whole life in the crosshairs, Sarah. Eventually, you've got to look up. She smiled, whispering into the cold air, I'm looking, Danny, finally. In the days that followed, her program began to grow. The Reeves Initiative wasn't just sniper training, it became something larger, a philosophy, a way of teaching restraint, empathy, and survival without losing the soul in the process. Soldiers came broken, left quieter, but stronger. Somewhere along the way, people stopped calling her the ghost of Fallujah. They started calling her the listener, because she always listened first, and somehow that changed everything. Years passed, wars shifted, faces changed, but her coordinates never did. The ink remained faded now, weathered but alive. Each line a story, each scar a promise kept. On her last day of service, Sarah stood alone at the range one final time. The sun rose slow, golden over the fields. She set her rifle down on the bench, cleaned it one last time and looked through the scope just for the sound of it, the quiet hum of breath, the stillness of focus. She aimed at nothing, fired at nothing, then lowered the weapon and smiled. A younger instructor called from across the field. Ma'am, we're all set for the ceremony. She nodded, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. Coming. As she walked away, she touched her neck one last time. The tattoo was cool beneath her fingers. Those coordinates didn't mark death anymore. They marked return. The place where a soldier learned how to lead, and where a woman learned how to live. And in the quiet before the applause, before the speeches, before the next chapter began, Sarah Reeves whispered something only the wind could hear. Still here, still standing, still human. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.